Thanks for coming to our workshop called Idea to Market or Concept to Lab. What we prepared is, first of all, a small presentation about each of our companies, and so more details about the design and the business idea and the business model behind our companies. And then we thought we would make it a bit interactive by having two cases, one from Instabeat and one from MC10, and we would get you to group into groups of around 10 people and discuss and brainstorm ideas, and then we can all discuss.
So we could actually, maybe just to make things easier logistically, if we could break into groups now, clusters of people, then it'll flow much more quickly later. So what we're thinking is this entire column of seats to the left, if you guys can consolidate into one team, that would be fantastic. And then we could have about 3 teams in the center and then 1 team on the right column. So once we get into the interactive session, you guys will be essentially working in groups and helping dissect some of the business cases that we're going to go through. So if you could move now, that would be fantastic, into tighter groups. That would be great. About 8 to 10 people should be sufficient to make it happen. I think we could get started.
Yeah. And please remember to stop us at any time. This is meant to be interactive and not about Instabeat or MC10. We just used cases from our startups because we just thought we would give you a concrete example rather than working on theoretical examples, but feel free to come in with your ideas and your suggestions at any time. So to start with a bit more background about Instabeat. So Instabeat is a monitor for swimmers. It tracks the heart rate, the calories, the laps, the turns, and the distance. So the whole concept behind Instabeat's design is that it was meant to remove friction from available devices on the market. So an example is the watches with the chest belt. First of all, the chest belt is really, really annoying. Personally, it doesn't let me breathe. And second of all, when you're a girl, you wear a one-piece swimming suit. It's really difficult to get it under your swimming suit. And if you're a guy, when you're diving, the chest belt just comes off. And so the point was to combine the smart elements between the watch and the belt, and then put them in a module that would exist on an accessory that swimmers already wear. And so swimmers wear swimming caps, swimming goggles, and swimming suits. And for the real-time display, I thought that swimming goggles would be the best. And so the entire design was based on the fact that we needed a frictionless design that is suitable for the dynamics of swimmers. So they wouldn't have to move their arms while they're swimming. They wouldn't have to move their heads while they're swimming. It would be right there in front of them all the time. And this is why we chose to measure the heart rate from the temples, so that we get rid of the chest belt. And this is why we chose to have a visual feedback on the lens so that swimmers are able to see it all the time while they're swimming. And so the real-time visual feedback was color-coded. We thought that since it's so close to the eye, it will be really difficult for the swimmers to read numbers. And so color coding seemed much more easy and much more intuitive. So you have blue for the fat burning zone and for lower heart rates. You have green for the fitness zone and red for the maximum performance zone. And so as you're swimming, the color will change in real time. So for example, when I swim one butterfly lap, I can see the color go from blue, green, red at the end of the lap. So it's really interactive. It gives a fun touch, and at the same time, you have useful information while you're swimming. And all of the data is stored, and it syncs with an online dashboard. And the point of the online dashboard is, first of all, for you to see your training stats, of course, but then to provide more in-depth analysis about your swim, correlate the different metrics, and also see how you're progressing over time. Because as you know, as you're getting fitter and if you're truly improving on your performance, your heart rate is supposed to get lower with time. And this is something that has not been available for swimmers yet. And so I just wanted to focus on the design of Instabeat because the case study that I'm going to give you about Instabeat is mainly going to be about the design aspect of Instabeat. So I just wanted you to understand more all of the different design elements that we combined in order to create the design. So Roos can talk more about MC10 now.
Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about starting kind of from the end and working backwards, so market back to the idea, exactly what are the focus areas of MC10 now, and kind of how these areas came out of ideas that were in the lab. And so, as I mentioned in the earlier talk, there's 3 different markets that we're really focused on, some of which are very early in kind of maturity, and then others where we've actually launched products. And I think as part of the exercise that we'll go into, it's based on the use cases that we've developed, what are the benefits of having this multiple vertical business strategy, and whether or not it makes sense with some of the technological activities that we have going. So if you look at what we offer, we're essentially deep down, we're a hardware company. So we developed this new stretchable, flexible electronics platform that then has all of these different features associated with it. So we have sensors like electrodes, accelerometers, gyroscopes, LEDs for light actuation, all coupled together with memory, microprocessing, wireless connectivity, as well as a battery that could drive all this. And imagine you put on a device, whether it's for sports or for a pharmaceutical company's use. We wanted to use this hardware innovation to drive a lot of the work that we do as a company. And the real question is, how do you develop the software on top of that platform, and does it fit any one market? And so we'll go into that, but this is kind of the starting point of a lot of the work that we did. And ultimately, what we'd like to do is create the ecosystem, so it's not just the hardware, but also the software, the app on the phone, and ultimately the data that comes back to either the customer, the consumer, or goes to the physician or the pharmaceutical company to help them decide whether or not they need to change their offering. And so this is the world we're creating right now, and it applies to a number of different segments: consumer health, sports, as well as medical devices. But how do you get to that point? And the real key is having intellectual property to drive a lot of this technology, and this IP was broadly around this concept of conformal electronics. And it's, if you look at our website, this information is there, and it really helped drive 10 years of development, what I would call the idea phase at the university setting, before we even got a company off the ground. And so actually, as a matter of fact, this is why we got the company off the ground. There was enough intellectual property there that investors became interested in our offering. And so companies in hardware and materials, this is very important type of piece of golden nugget to have. In software and app-specific types of applications and companies, this may be less because you're just moving quickly to reach your consumer base or your customer base, and you can maybe get away with it. But with hardware and electronics in particular, we had this very deep foundation to build off of. And this is kind of visualized in the business strategy that we established. So what I've listed up there are the logo for University of Illinois, where our lead technical co-founder sits. He's a professor there, developing stretchable electronics, and he's been doing that for over 15 years. That R&D work, that prototyping work, feeds into MC10, what I call products, and then ultimately leads to partnerships and more IP that helps drive the business. But ultimately, we also have our own development work, ideation that happens at MC10, and then that also feeds into products. So these two different streams of ideas and concepts that we develop leads to new products down the road. Some of them are 5 to 10 years out, and others are much more closer along the timeline. And ultimately, as one case in point that we've already executed on is this concept of MC10 building a solution for, say, a company like Reebok or Adidas that then gets co-branded and distributed as a product through Reebok sales channels. So we don't have sales and distribution people. We're a startup company, but we develop the hardware and the software, and then ultimately an apparel or shoe or fitness company like Reebok takes that solution, wraps it around some of their apparel, and then ultimately launches it on their website or in the marketplace. And that's an existing example of a product that we've shipped with the partner as part of this. And that really, for us, that was going from the idea phase to market, but leveraging a partner to do that. Because as a startup company, we thought about it and we could have gone that path, but it would have exhausted all of our resources. So we went about it by partnering across a number of different verticals, this being one of them. And ultimately, I'll just wrap up with this. It takes a while. So even there, this is after years of tech development work that the company was founded upon. There was still, proof of concept phases as well as product validation that you have to go through. And ultimately, it took 2 to 3 years to get something that we had, been working on in the lab and in the concept phase all the way through verification, validation, and commercialization. And ultimately, there's a lot of people who play a role in that other than myself, who, I would be more in the ideation innovation phase. We had to bring on manufacturing people, marketing people, as well as people who can essentially work with contract manufacturers to be able to build this technology out. So I think I'll leave it there. And one of the case studies that I'll talk about following Hind's is being able to pick and select the different market segments that we could go to. And we'll have an interactive session to decide on the medical versus the pharma, since I highlighted the consumer and sports in that segment.
So I think what's interesting is to notice the differences of getting from the idea to the lab between both companies. And for example, in MC10's case, it was a research that had been going on in MIT for a while. And then after a few years of research, they took it to the lab and actually built the technology and are relying on strategic partnerships in order to make consumer or products out of them. While in Instabeat's case, we picked a very specific vertical from the start, and we knew what the product was going to be from the start. And actually, what we tried to build is actually a good design that would feed this vertical. And so this is how we tried to base the different cases. Is first of all, in Instabeat's case study, is how to tackle this vertical, because design is a very, very big element in Instabeat's existence, because if it cannot provide a better design than what's already existing, then it really has no added value. And so the first question we were asking ourselves with the engineering and design team when we started Instabeat was, should we create a module that mounts on swimming goggles, or should we integrate the electronics inside the swimming goggles? And this is the case that I want all of us together to brainstorm. And so if you look at the pictures, these are both pictures from the patent application we filed 4 years ago, and I actually tried to cover both design scenarios in the patent application. Because as you know, there are 2 design considerations. Is first of all, this needs to be as small and slim as possible, and it needs to integrate a visual feedback. So based on this and the Instabeat presentation, I would invite you all to take maybe 10 minutes in order to discuss the different design elements and then come up with a decision. And then afterwards, we can have 1 or 2 groups talk about the design decision and what's the strategy and thinking behind it. And of course, I'll be walking around, and Roos knows the answer too, so he can help you out as well.
Yeah.
Is some kind of technological innovation behind these goggles, or it's just a matter of a good design that fit a market need?
So yes, the heart rate sensor was actually the most challenging technical innovation behind it. We used an optical heart rate sensor, and we wanted to measure the heart rate out of the temporal artery, which runs next to the eye and is a ramification of the artery that runs through the neck. And the challenge with this artery is that, first of all, it's very small, And second of all, it has a different location between one person and another. And so it took us 3 years actually to build a sensor that was robust enough, first of all, to detect the heart rate from any person's temple, and second of all, to detect an accurate heart rate despite the strong motion that's created during the swim movement. So this, I would say, was the biggest technological hurdle. Yes. Second technological hurdle for any consumer electronics device is the battery life, I would say. And so today you can choose having a small battery that will give you a 1 hour lifetime in your device, or you can choose having a big bulky device with 10 hours lifetime. So these are all design considerations that we need to take.
I have a question for Roos.
Yes.
Roos, as you indicated in your presentation and also in the break, to develop this hardware-based system, you needed a lot of time of research. And basically the research was done in a very well-equipped laboratory, MIT and Harvard, etc. Now, do you think that this work could be done if somebody tried to do it outside a laboratory like an MIT laboratory? And what do you think, the returns on this type of work, hardware-based work, are much higher than the returns on software-based work, which, of course, does not need any equipment, much equipment, or investment period?
Yeah, so we, just to reiterate, because that's a great point, for a lot of companies you see in Silicon Valley, there's obviously a shift towards doing things that are much more software-focused, and that doesn't mean that software companies are more valuable. It just means that sometimes the activation energy to get a software product off the ground is much easier, it's cheaper. That doesn't mean that the world should shift away from hardware and materials research, which I think we've tried to invest in. It's just the upfront capital cost is so much higher that you don't see it very often, and it takes more time. For us, it's really been a focus on developing technologies that kind of branch out of the university. So University of Illinois, MIT, Harvard, these are centers where you have the right infrastructure, nanofabrication labs to be able to develop these sorts of semiconductor advances. But that's not the only places. Those aren't the only ones. Cornell, Europe has a few different areas of research in flexible electronics in Belgium. The IMEC Institute, there's essentially a global effort to develop flexible and very conformal electronics, which I think we as a company had to take that research and begin to think about applying it in ways that actually make sense and have product implications. And so it's going to continue. It's not just those 3 universities. University of Illinois has been great because Professor John Rogers is there and he's linked with us, but there are other places that do this. Ultimately, it's going to take more than just one company or one laboratory that has nanofabrication capabilities. It's going to take essentially what's happening in Europe, North America, Asia, and essentially to get to product, these things have to be adopted at the level of contract manufacturing houses that do flexible runs, and that's already starting to happen, and we're playing a role in that. But to make products that are truly flexible, it's not going to just happen in 3 labs. It's going to require investment from Samsung and from a lot of different companies to be able to push and so that you begin to see some of these things out in the marketplace.
Okay.
Cool.
If there aren't any more questions, I invite you all to start discussing with your group. If you were part of Instabeat's team 3 years ago, and you were faced with the design decision that actually is going to, the whole business model of your company depends on, would you design electronics integrated into the swimming goggles, or would you design a standalone module that fits on any swimming goggles? So we'll take maybe 10 minutes for brainstorming, and then we'll stop you at the end of the 10 minutes, and we'll discuss and then move to MC10's case.
Don't you think that by coincidence you might be competitors or partners in the future?
Us too?
Yeah, yes.
That's a good question. We're not in swimming, so
Not
But
yet.
Not yet, yeah.
No, but it could be the case, but you know, there's always a culture of collaboration and learning from the competitors. And having competitors is a very good sign, actually. It shows that there is demand, and it actually pushes you to be more innovative and faster to the market. So, game on, Roos.
Yeah, it could happen. After this conference. It's because of this conference.
We need one team to present which design option they went with and why. Who wants to go first? Okay, so maybe the team here.
We decided to go with the right design first, initially, for many reasons. Firstly, it's cheaper to design. There's room for growth. There's room for a 2.0, version 2.0. It's faster to market. It's easier to adapt to existing products, such as Speedo or whoever already makes goggles, rather than entering a market where they're actually your competitors. I mean, the right one can just click onto brands of goggles that already exist. And you can also have a longer battery life, maybe in the right version, because the left version is more sleek, and with the technology that exists, maybe we can have more battery life on the right one. It's more easy to introduce version B than version A because it can adapt to already existing products. And the left one would need more design effort, time and money. So I would say that we'd start with the right one. Not that the left one isn't better for consumers, but the right one is better for the company and for growth and as an initial startup.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone think that designing the entire pair of goggles is better, like has a counter argument? So everyone picked that same option?
Wait, that's too easy.
So who has something to add? This group.
Okay, we are covered with the previous team. The cons are that it could be heavier and bulkier, but it's the first attempt, so there's room for improvement. And also negatives for the goggles are for sure that's going to be more expensive, and a pair of goggles is not expensive. So until you get to a point where you can make it cheap enough for someone to forget them on the pool, then it's probably a second choice. So.
We have also seen one more point is that goggles right now, they have also some visual corrections, and they have also different modules. So actually you will inherit all those problems in your unique design if you choose the left one.
Any other group has anything to add? Okay, so do you have the clicker? Okay, so I'll explain the thinking that we went through. We went through all of your arguments. The main driver, the main driver was the fact that as an athlete, you change your goggles very frequently, and Olympic athletes change their goggles every month. And for example, I change my goggles twice or 3 times a year, and I definitely don't want to do that if my goggles are costing me $150. So yes, absolutely the cost consideration. And second of all, it's also what you said, we didn't want to compete with companies like Speedo and Arena that have been doing goggle design for years. We did not have the capability of designing the same goggle technology that they had. And so this is how we came up with the idea of having a module that mounts on goggles. Now the challenges for this were completely different because today on the market there are 90 different shapes of goggles, 90. And so we bought 90 pair of goggles, and we started testing every single one of them. And some of them are round, some of them are triangular, some of them are super tiny, some of them are huge, some of them are masks. And so it was really a huge challenge to design one module that fits on any pair of goggles. And this is why we ended up choosing a very flexible material so that no matter what goggles you pick and you're comfortable swimming with, you will have a device that adapts to the shape of the goggles. And actually this has helped us a lot from the business perspective because today we are able to partner with companies like Speedo and Arena and other sports companies in order to launch a newer version of the product together.
So I have a question. With this design, can you essentially have it be universal? Like any goggle will work, or is there like a certain class? Because I've seen goggles that are very skinny and then some that are bigger.
Yes.
How do you adapt or?
So if you look at, there's this round nose bridge, and this is actually super flexible. So this will stretch if the goggles are big, and it will go tighter if the goggles are small. And the LED neck actually that runs from the lights up onto the device, this is also very flexible. I actually have a device, I should show it to you. So this is very flexible, and this adapts to most swimming goggles. So the idea was that if you're a swimmer, you probably have a shape that fits your head better. And so you wouldn't want to wear a shape of like a form of goggles that makes you uncomfortable. So this is Instabeat. And so this is very stretchable, and this is very stretchable. And actually manufacturing something stretchable is so difficult. And I wished all throughout that we were designing a pair of goggles, but eventually, like from a business perspective, it made just so much more sense to have a module that mounts on any goggles. So yeah, you all got it right. So thank you for approving what we've done for the past 4 years. Yeah, okay, so now moving to NC10's business case. Thanks, everyone. Yes. Of course.
So, is there any room for the user to customize his thresholds?
So it's all customizable on the dashboard, so you can pick which heart rate zones you want to see. You pick blue is from this heart rate to this heart rate, green is this much. You even have the option of turning off the light if it annoys you. You can dim and brighten the intensity. Later on, we're adding the option for the user to pick whether he wants to see heart rate or total lap. So for example, blue means 10 laps, green means 20 laps. So you see, the whole point is to have a very, very simple UI, but that lets you get to your goal of the training. Yes.
Any other questions?
Great.
All right, cool. So for the second half of the case challenge, we're going to take you guys back to our Reebok co-partnership as a starting point. And as I mentioned, this is a device that we've co-developed with Reebok. Co-develop means, you know, we built the hardware and they put it together into their little head cap, and we launched it. It's the intended use of this product is it senses impact. So it has an accelerometer and a gyroscope that when you essentially feel force, whether it's a collision, you get the acceleration effect that is essentially sensed by the unit, and it registers an indication of a light-based indication, kind of like Instabeat, where if you've had a very hard hit that could cause a concussion, then it'll turn red. And if it's yellow, that means you should, go get it checked out. And if it's green, that means that you're okay. There's a lot of data that went into collecting a lot of collisions. Kind of imagine like a dummy's head just running down into a steel plate and calibrating exactly how much force is good. It was correlated with data from concussions. So we basically spent a lot of time figuring out what was the right threshold for these different light indications. So that's the starting point. And what's really key is that this was a non-medical product. So there's no indications that or claims that we made around it being a concussion diagnostic or anything like that. So the question is, now that this product launched, and these sensors and others are very relevant for diagnostics. So you could imagine having accelerometers and gyroscopes doing other types of sensing on the body for a medical application. The question and the thing that I'd like you guys to think about is, what are the challenges to go into a medical market for diagnosis or for looking at traumatic brain injury is one example that feeds off of this. What do you consider? What are the big pitfalls? Would you ultimately do it, or would you stay in more consumer markets? So what are the pros and cons given, a startup company and, going after multiple segments? How do you guys think about it? And it's actually, it's meant to be a discussion. There's a lot of different answers that you could take, and just would like to hear what you guys think. And I could answer any questions about this device and what it actually means to build this into a medical device. Because the current generation is not medical. So, do you go after a medical market or not? And what are all the things that you have to think about in order to do that? Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So about 10 minutes again, and feel free to ask questions now or later. Yep.
Okay. One quick question. Does the device stores data related to the patient, or it's just instantly correlating everything and just produce a result?
Yeah, great question. So the device does store data. It has memory as well as microprocessor and ability to transmit data. So you could think about all those things as being the assumption going in is that suite of functionalities exists on the device. That's right. Essentially is a case study trying to figure out how you guys would take the business forward in terms of making it into a medical device and partnering it up with medical companies, or doing something that is purely consumer. So that was kind of the case. Does anyone want to start with what they would recommend as a path forward?
We just came up with one question on your question.
Yep.
We see that it does not really answer any diagnostic question.
That's right.
And therefore, it's not a medical.
This is not a medical device. The question, though, is that you could collect enough data to make it into a medical device by seeing if you can make a claim. And the real question there is, do you go down that path and do that, or do you stick with it being a non-diagnostic and just have it be a consumer device that just gives you some bit of information and have the consumer or the user go off and decide what to do with the information? That's actually exactly the point is, if you do want it to be a medical device, you have to go down the path of collecting clinical data to show that you've actually validated this as a medical product. And that costs time and money. So is there anyone who thinks that you should go down that path? Yep.
What's the potential market if you get the FDA approval?
Yeah, so
military, sports, what is it?
Right, so there's a few different areas. So for this particular application, if you get FDA approval for this type of device, you could imagine it being used in cases where it expands beyond sports, so for military applications. So someone who has some type of explosion effects and they feel that. That would be a traumatic brain injury that you would sense and tell the doctors who are in the triage or in ambulatory care that this patient had some type of concussion or brain damage. And so that's exactly where you can imagine, and the markets, how big they are. It's ultimately for us a question of time, because if you take it down that path, you need a lot more data to get a CE mark, to get a 510K approval. And whether or not you do that, it's a question that we've faced and other companies in this type of activity monitoring and consumer health space face all the time. Do you go after the CE mark? Do you go after the 510K? Because it costs money, it costs time. Which one is it?
Just saying also the military, but if you take out the sports, which is a whole, there's a lot of diplomacy and where do you take out the athlete, if it's green or it's red and so on. But an area where it could be easier to focus on diagnosis is for helmet. Like, because they say that when they fall from the bike, you shouldn't take off the helmet. So maybe if that hat is inside a helmet and it says it's red, then you shouldn't take it off. If it's green, maybe it's better for the person that's down on the street to take it off, so that, I don't know, maybe that's a case that there's no outside politics. So, and it's easier to go to FDA or medical approval.
Right. So, and that's a good example. And also, imagine this is very flexible, so you could wear it. So, in the case of geriatrics, so patients who are older who have loss of balance, if they fall, fall detection is a really big, important area. But it usually you wear it as a pendant. But if you wear it on your head and you experience a fall, a head impact, that's important to calculate. In all of these cases, the important thing that we have to consider is whether or not to take it down the path where you make the claims around a diagnosis. And what are some of the considerations there? If you do make a claim, I'll give you an example. You probably have to do a clinical trial. And so, how do you consider a clinical trial versus just going to market? What are some of the things that would put you in favor of doing a clinical trial?
A new market perspective in order to get more potential customers, and but it's a risk because even a small error in the design later on the track that you're developing the product, you may face big difficulties.
Yeah. So there's a lot that you already learned from doing a consumer-based product, and we have it in the market. Some of the considerations, if you take it down medical, is now you have clinical people who are putting their weight behind your product. So it's not just you saying it, but now there's doctors. And we do that all the time. We have folks who are clinical experts, key opinion leaders in the field. That's like step number one for even some of the work that we're doing. We'd like to get a group of experts to say, look, this is actually very important. Not only that, but to get athletes to sign up and say this is very important. And just pushing it down to the medical product realm, that amplifies. You have to do that even more because ultimately the people who are running the trials are the people who are going to essentially give your stamp of approval when it comes to the FDA. Yep.
It's also very capital intensive. So you end up spending a lot of cash.
Exactly. So
you've got VCs, you've got investment bankers and all that, and then as soon as soon as you miss one of the FDA approval dates, your stock goes down the drain.
Right.
And you lose VCs very quickly, and your athletes are going to go away. So it's a very risky path unless the market size justifies that.
Exactly. So that is essentially the risk that you run when you go after certain medical indications and claims and FDA. And I think the counter to that is if you do go after it and you find success at the end, typically medical devices, you charge a much higher premium than you would for, say, a consumer device that would be a typical device. If it's $100 to $200, that's already somewhat of a premium. Whereas with a medical device, say devices that are telling you about heart failure or certain indications, $500 and up is essentially very reasonable for a medical device. And people will pay it because there's some validation associated with it. But whether or not you make that decision or that leap is essentially the biggest question that a lot of companies face going forward. Yep.
There's also the issue of false positives and false negatives. I mean, false positives means that someone hits his head, he's okay, but you suggest that he goes and has his head checked. On the other side, a false negative means that the device tells him that you're fine, and then he goes home and dies. And that raises a lot of legal issues there. Right, exactly. And that's where I think having an FDA clearance or the studies that show what the actual accuracy is and precision is really helps protect you in some ways from that world where if you just make certain claims, then there are legal risks. And a lot of devices that
have made certain claims and they've turned out to be false, there's essentially a lawsuit potential that could happen. I think if you go down the medical path, you're essentially protecting yourself a little bit from those sorts of outcomes because you lay out the risk associated with each of the things that could happen. And you've collected a lot of data to show, how much false positives and negatives occur. And ultimately for us, it became a question of who the partners are going to be. Medical device companies or consumer companies like Reebok versus like a Medtronic. And in all cases, the margins are always stacked in your favor for medical devices, so you don't have to sell 1 million units as a medical device. You probably could get away with selling thousands of units at much higher margin. But for a consumer play, you need to sell a lot more, and you need to make money off of certain aspects of the margins, which are much slimmer. And we deal with that all the time. Yep.
Wouldn't FDA approval for MC10 be a lot easier for the clinical trials than introducing a new drug because it's completely non-invasive? It's actually just a sticker, essentially.
Right. Yeah, so it's much easier. It's something that companies, so it's a 510K Class 2 device, which if you compare it to a Class 3 or a pre-market approval, PMA, it's much quicker and less data is required than, say, like compared to an implantable device.
And cheaper.
And cheaper. It's still not without risk. I think to the point made earlier, you still need to invest as a company. So what do I mean by that? You need to be ISO 9001. You need ISO 13485 certification, quality management control in such a way that allows you to be able to build, medical products. And those are all the considerations that if you're thinking about making the leap from consumer to medical, you have to take into mind, because end of the day, it costs money and time to do that, but maybe it's worth it if it helps build barriers against competitors who then would have to invest in all of that certification, but you've already done that work and you're 2 years ahead of them. Yep.
Do you need FDA approval to use this for pharmaceutical research?
For research, it's different. So if you're using it as kind of off-label and you're collecting data from it, you don't. But hopefully that data is used to collect information that goes towards a submission. And so those are all considerations. This is currently just a consumer product, but I think doing this exercise gives you guys some perspective on how consumer health and devices that are not medical, what do you have to consider as a company, as a startup, to go down that path, because it's much different. But certainly you could use it for research.
All right, so we sat together, and even though we have different approaches of how we actually got our products to market, I think we pretty much shared the lessons we've learned along the journey. And so first of all, when it comes to the product, failing quickly to get to the right product market fit. So for example, we first designed goggles with integrated electronics, but then as you saw, we realized that this was not what customers wanted, and this was not to the best advantage of the company. And this is how we iterated really quickly, and I think we went through 9 different prototype versions, and each one had a different set of failures until we got to the right product market fit. And actually we were constantly testing the device with users, and when we launched the crowdfunding campaign, this was also a great tool for us to understand better what customers want, because it's something to give customers a product for free and tell them what do you think, and then actually asking them to pay for the product and really genuinely tell you what they think. And so for us, the crowdfunding was really key in order to get to the right market product.
Yeah, I think for us, finding the right partners, because as I mentioned, we are not just building one product, and we're working in different spaces like consumer health and sports, as well as medical devices. It became really clear that in order to be able to succeed in a few different areas, you need to partner with not just anyone, but the right partners that complement what you bring to the table. So if we're developing hardware, you don't want to team up with a hardware company necessarily. You may want to team up with someone who brings in the clinical trial perspectives or the ability to fit you into the sales and distribution channels with their products. And so that really became important for us to filter out a lot of the noise, because a lot of companies that strategically may be interested in you, which I think is very important to kind of wean off of venture capital money to go after strategics. They're not in it to help make you a billion-dollar company. They want to build products with you and bring in revenues for themselves as well. So it was very important for us to pick the right partners that helped us, as well as making it a win-win situation. In the consumer space, which we've kind of covered, and then ultimately in other categories where the regulatory pushes the timeline very tight, coupled to the face, and that's by design so that water doesn't leak in. And that's allowed Hind and her team to be able to build a way to optically measure off of the artery, because you need that tight coupling. There's a lot of companies that build wrist-based heart rate monitors, and if it's loosely coupled, it's going to give you crap data. So it's possible to collaborate. I think the real key innovation with the goggle is that you have a substrate that you could build onto, which isn't necessarily MC10 compatible. I mean, if it was just something that you wanted to put on your temple, then that may be different. But ultimately, exploiting the goggles tight fit makes a lot of sense. That's separate.
And I think more than the tight fit is also the display. So we actually at some point thought about not making flexible electronics, but making something that sticks and that can be removed. But then how do you manage to have a real-time display on your goggles? And that's when it gets more complicated. So it's easy to plug a sensor anywhere, but how do you have one module that fits on the goggles? And so there's definitely room for collaboration with MC10 and all of other very interesting companies. And at the end of the day, we're part of the larger ecosystem of people who want to analyze their data. And I think the challenge now is you get data from different devices. How are you able to correlate between these different devices? And I think some members of this community are taking it a step further and making these correlations. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a key piece in both of the MC10 first product that I showed and Instabeat is this real-time feedback, which I think we could build a heart rate sensor that goes in the water and you put it on your chest, but the real challenge that Instabeat has cracked is the display, or what kind of actionable feedback can you give to the user at the right time. So that is a very big part of the solution there. It's also, with our device, there is an LED indication if you get hit, such that right away. You don't go home and plug it into through your USB port and figure out later. So this concept of actionable data quickly so that you could modify your pattern or know right away makes a big difference compared to other products.
Absolutely.
Yep.
What can MC10 or Instabeat even do for the common well, like for in a form of charity or to help socially? Is there something that's in your plans, or you're thinking about using the technology that you own for a good cause without profit?
Yeah, so I'll start with, so the whole DNA, as I've mentioned, is around university startup. So, in 2008, when we were getting started, actually, let's see, so George Bush was in office, he left. Obama came in office, and the market tanked. So everything went very cold everywhere. In the US especially, there were times when people didn't even know if venture capital would be around. It was a very tough time in 2008, 2009. And what we did as kind of a university spin-out was apply for a lot of grants. We were just going after National Institutes of Health funding, government, military funding, everything that we could get a hold of, because we didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. It was very early in the gestation period of MC10. And I'm really happy that kind of happened in retrospect. It didn't feel great at the time, but if you fast forward a few years later, what we have done in kind of that spirit of let's just build things that have impact is we've really been able to leverage the Gates Foundation, which turned out to be one of the funding agencies that we submitted a grant towards. And what we're doing with them is we're helping build a diagnostic for developing countries that has some of our electronics embedded into it that connects with a phone, and it transmits diagnostic data, point-of-care data, to the cloud instantly. And this is an effort that's being done with a nonprofit diagnostics organization to build instant diagnostic in anywhere in the developing world, so Africa, parts of South America and Asia, where you don't have access to diagnostics for HIV, malaria, micronutrient levels. And this is a grant effort for us, but it's one that I'm very passionate about. And the Gates Foundation has been great in kind of helping push these sorts of initiatives forward. And so we're doing that now.
So is it the same concept that you use for athletes and medical purposes, that it's like or is it something that you implant?
No, it's not implanted. It's actually like it can take a drop of sweat and do some analysis on it, or a drop of blood and it could do analysis. What we did is we took a colorimetric assay and we integrated circuits that could make the test more quantitative. And it sends the data over a radio frequency.
So you took, I'm sorry, my questions keep coming.
Yeah, no problem.
So you took, in a way, like two, not loans or supporting kind of money from two different sources. One for a good cause, for the Gates Foundation, and something else for the, like a Reebok.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. For development, for commercial. And so the way we see it, and end of the day, you're a company that is for profit, but that type of grant effort really helps drive the technology development, so everyone benefits from it. You help potentially developing countries, which like the Gates Foundation can help deploy some of this stuff, or alternatively, you could think of it as you're developing technology that could feed into future generations of your product using non-venture capital dollars.
Yeah, sure. So we are working with an organization called Athletes Without Limits, and they are coaches that train mentally disabled swimmers. And so for us, it's having a device that is the communication tool between the swimmer and the coach. And so the coach has a really hard time explaining to the swimmer that, for example, he needs to swim at a heartbeat of 75. But it's much easier for the coach to explain, okay, right now you need to see a red light while you're swimming. And so really Instabeat for them is a tool to communicate with these swimmers like they haven't been able to before, and help them improve their performance when it wasn't possible before.
How does that make you feel?
I actually, when I first talked to the coach, I thought this was life-changing. I was thinking purely performance, Olympics, people winning, shaving off a few seconds, but here you're actually changing how people talk to each other through a device, which is unbelievable.
Is it better than earning, I don't know, like $1,000 more per month? Or?
I'd like to have both at the same time, if possible. You need to do both in parallel, because one's going to make you feel much more rewarded, but one's also going to sustain the business, so you need to do both at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so we can move to the second lesson, which is none of this would have been possible without a great team that builds the product. And I think we talked today a lot about hiring teams, and I think it's critical to know when to hire what kind of people. So for example, in Instabeat's case, we stayed for 2 years with one electronics engineer and one industrial designer. And I purposely picked these people to be quite young, but also with a few years of experience. And I think for us it was very important, since we had no idea what the concept of Instabeat was going to be. It was very important to have people that were very flexible and very quick and very creative as well. And so in the first 2 years, we were hiring mostly creative people, so the electronics engineer and then the designer. But then we've hired a quality control engineer, and when we started shifting towards launching a product onto the market and going into manufacturing, that's when we started hiring based on expertise and experience rather than creativity and innovation and passion. So I think we've personally made lots of hiring mistakes along the way, thinking that we needed someone very managerial at the beginning, but then it didn't work out. And I think this is the key takeaway, like experiment as much as possible with very creative people in the beginning, and then when you start having a process, go into the very structural things of the business. So,
yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all that. I think for us, early hires, I mean, even now, we spend a lot of time, during our recruiting process, because we want the A+ and A players who are essentially going to help us get to the next level. And that means that you go through quite a bit of interviews where you don't necessarily pick someone. And it could be, really good people in certain ways, but then, one of our team members says, oh, but, I didn't understand exactly how they did the quality engineering work in this experience. And, if there is a doubt, maybe there is no doubt that, that this may not be a good fit. And it's painful because it takes a lot of time. But end of the day, I think the result is that when I wake up in the morning, I love to go to work, because end of the day, it's like you're dealing with your teammates all the time. And it's not fun if you don't like the people you work with and you're not passionate about it and if they're not passionate about it. So really, as you grow and you go from 4 people, 10 people, 15, 20 people, it gets harder, because there's always like one oddball that could pop up. It's just statistics; it'll happen, and so you got to correct the course quickly. And I think we've tried really hard to do that, and we've got some amazing talent at MC10, and it makes life fun and easier for a lot of the earlier people who've been there. And I think it's just a key part of being successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can give an example. So at some point, we hired a community manager. She was really good at her job, but she was a very negative person. And it started playing, and we were 4 people at that time, and it's really starting to feel like a negative vibe in the team. And it actually made me not want to go to the office in the morning, which is very weird because I'm the founder and the swimmer behind all of this. And so this is when I realized that I cannot continue like this, and that, of course, after talking to the team, we had to let this person go, because even though she was unbelievably good, culture is super important, and this is something I want to keep emphasizing on, is that you need to have fun in the early days, and you need to feel the creative and the creativity and the passion that everyone has, because otherwise, when you don't have a product on the market yet, surviving to get to that stage is so difficult and can take such a long time that it needs to be really fun. And in order to sustain the fun, you need to raise money. And so I had won money from Stars of Science that I first spent on legal constitutions in Lebanon, which are pretty expensive, and then filing patents in the US and in Europe. And then right after this, I raised a small amount of money from the investors. And I think the biggest thing I learned is that I should have waited a little bit more, since I had money already, in order to experiment and to understand better what my market is, who my customers are, and what my product is going to be. I think having investors really early on in the company can sometimes be limiting. You feel like you have to report to someone constantly, which can be good, but at the same time, which can make you take decisions very quickly when you're not supposed to be taking these decisions. So my advice would be go as far as you can go without raising money, and then when you feel it, you're at an inflection point, so going from prototype to manufacturing or from manufacturing to scaling, those are, I mean, the two inflection points we went through in order to raise some money.
Yeah, I think for us, raising money from venture capital and then raising money from strategic partners, that was, you can't learn that in school. It's like you just have to kind of see where you are, and ultimately that is the big pivot point where you as a company start to grow up a little bit. And when that happens is very critical. For us, it happened as we were kind of launching our first product. For other companies I've seen who are doing work in biologics or small molecules, it could happen earlier where they, drug companies or cosmetic companies can start to invest earlier in time. And that really, I think, makes a big difference, because if you can get investments from partners, it puts you in kind of a different control situation where they just want to see products, and they're not necessarily there for like their 10x return in 2 years or 5 years, the way some venture capital firms are. And so for our company, that was really important, but we're essentially a hardware play, so we had to raise initial venture capital to be able to even get some of the strategic partnerships that we had to get those types of deals in place. And so we went after investors who our network knew well. So without having people who really believed in the technology, it's a long road. It's not an app where you can exit in a year. It's something that takes a long time. And so getting the right investors who can really withstand and help come along the way with you is very critical. All of our investors from Series A are still with us, so that's also like a good sign, because they were there to kind of invest early on, and they didn't jump ship. So, yep.
Yeah. So I think these are the three main pillars for going from idea to the lab, then to market, and then to scaling. And I hope you enjoyed this workshop. And if you have more questions or would like to discuss, yes, please.
Yes, I have one question related to team and money. How did you form the team? When did you start paying the team? Who was part of the first ones that just made demos for fun and to help?
I guess I'll start. So we had a situation where the technology had already been developed in the university lab, and early on, even though the market was tough, we had a seed round of financing to kind of carry us through initially. But we were essentially bootstrapped the first year, just incubated in a tiny office, writing patents, working on specific markets where we wanted to tackle. And it was really tough, because we were all like, it wasn't a startup garage. It was a venture capital kind of type of scenario where the office was essentially provided by our VC. And so the sooner you start going down that path, the sooner you have to answer to people and help answer board meeting updates and things like that. So I think I agree. There's with what Hind said as well. It's like you need to know when you go after that. And the few people that we had early on were not folks who were worried about life insurance and healthcare and are we going to have coverage in the first 6 months of the company? We were just essentially we believed in what we had, and we thought all of that other stuff would take care of itself. And so those first few hires or first few co-founders are very critical, because you could fail and you may not raise money, but who you have going to battle with you, they need to be in the same mindset as you. And we were fortunate, because even though the market was rough, we had people who invested early, so we didn't go through hiccup periods where we didn't have funding, but end of the day, it was like it could have happened at any time because the market was so bad back then. So, you know, and I think it's all because of the DNA of the people. Like, if we didn't have those first 3 guys who are, you know, really committed to it because they believed in it, then, you know, it could have fallen apart easily.
For us, it was a step-by-step process. So I'm the only founder of the company, and for me, the first priority was to improve the product. And so to hire, I tried to hire engineers in the beginning, and it was very difficult to do so. And so I then decided to hire freelancers. So for the first 8 months to 1 year, I was working with freelancers outside of Lebanon, and we actually got to a better version of the prototype. And so once I had more money and a better version of the prototype, I started hiring freelancers in Lebanon. So it was very gradual from showing them a product that they actually like and trust so that they're excited enough to join me. In Lebanon, it's difficult because there's no startup culture like in the US. So people are not going to join for salary, and they're definitely not going to join for equity. So people don't care about equity in Lebanon. So they want money at the end of the day. And so I had to pay every single person that worked with me. Of course, I paid them minimal wages with the promise that when we raise funding, I will increase your salary. And I only went to hiring full-time people a year ago, actually. So people that actually have health insurance. So when we raised our round after crowdfunding, that's when I started hiring people full-time, because really the focus before that was getting a product and having the right talent, even if it's freelance, even if it's outside of Lebanon and we're not in the same room. So I didn't pay rent for 2 years, but we made the product work. And now when it's about building a team in order to scale the organization, now I really feel the need of having a solid team, full-timers who get some money. Of course, some of them are on equity, and that's important for scaling. But before that, I feel that any startup can start with freelancers, especially in Athens. Lots of people came to me and told me that talent is very hard to find. I think my advice would be go on forums, try to hire people, just get your product to be better and get it out there, because that's the first step and that's the basis of your business. And then money and team will follow.
Yep.
Hi, a very short question regarding funding. I realize that you both have raised institutional funding, correct?
Sufficient?
Institutional funding from VCs,
Yes.
non-angel investments. Having a well-structured exit strategy when you ask for institutional funding, is it so important as we read on the internet or not? What is your opinion on this? Do you have to show an exit strategy or not?
We talk about an exit strategy, but honestly, I think they're investing because they feel that they are investing in the technology, and however way that exit strategy unfolds, it's probably not going to be what you show on the slide to them, and they know that. So I think it's that initial, what's your first product going to be, and where are you going to go from there, that they really wanted to see from us, and like a promise that if you start getting wins, it could be getting small wins early on, but that helps build the story. And you don't have to know the answer in chapter 8, because I mean you could say whatever you think, but I wouldn't believe it necessarily, because it's hard to predict 5 years ahead, let alone 6 months ahead. But it's good to have a story nonetheless going in, and we definitely did pitch, here's the first thing and first market that we're going to go tackle, and here's where we're going to go from there. The further out you go in time, the less believable it is, but those initial things, and for us it was the vision behind the technology as being kind of very platform oriented and ubiquitous, it could apply to a lot of things, was appealing to certain classes of investors. Not everyone. Some people like to just see a product and, okay, that's going to lead to an exit strategy after that product. And there's all sorts of investors out there. So It's really what works best for what you believe in.
Yeah, it's a company strategy, really. Like, as you said, some people build products starting from the exit. So I want to sell this company at this much to this company, and then this is what I need to do in order to sell it. But in our case, for example, at Instabeat, we are building a company and we're trying to grow the company and expand the technology. I think it's similar for MC10. So I've never ever discussed an exit strategy in a pitch. Of course, afterwards they ask you the question and you discuss the possibilities. But when you're trying to grow a company and given how unpredictable things can be, I think it's very, very difficult to plan for an exit from your early days. And investors definitely know that. All right, thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Appreciate it.